It was almost midnight when her phone started buzzing for the third time. She said it was work, but no boss whispers, "I miss you," like that. My wife had no idea I was still awake listening from the hallway. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. The night of July 3rd started like every other summer night in Franklin, Tennessee. Warm and slow. The kind of night where the air sits heavy on your skin and the sound of crickets fills every gap of silence. The sky over the neighborhood was a deep violet at the edges, the last strip of daylight fading out behind the tree line. Fireflies blinked in the backyard. The American flag on the front porch moved gently in the breeze, just barely, like it was breathing. Everett Klein stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing the last of the dinner dishes. Through the window above the sink, he could see the old oak tree in the backyard casting a wide, dark shadow across the grass. He had mowed that lawn himself the day before, straight, even rows, the way he did everything. His two kids, Miles and Avery, had been asleep for almost an hour. The neighborhood was quiet. The house smelled like grilled burgers and sunscreen, and just a trace of the citronella candles Kendra had lit on the back porch before dinner. Everything looked normal. Everything looked fine. That was the thing about Everett. He always noticed the details that didn't add up, not in a suspicious or paranoid way, but in the way a man who had built his career on reading systems, understanding how things were supposed to work, and recognizing the small signals that told him something was drifting off course. A unit that was cycling too often. A team member who was hitting every deadline except the ones that actually required coordination. A financial report where the numbers were technically correct, but the patterns were wrong. He had learned early that the gap between what people said and what they actually did was where the real information lived. He dried his hands on the dish towel and sat on the counter. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned back against the counter's edge, looking at nothing in particular. The kitchen was clean and quiet. The ceiling fan above the table turned slowly. On the refrigerator door, Avery's drawing of a horse, which looked more like a very serious dog, was held up with a strawberry magnet. Miles had left his baseball cap on the back of a chair again. Then he heard it, a soft buzz from the bedroom down the hall. Her phone on the nightstand. One vibration, then silence. He didn't think anything of it. She had clients. She had emails. She ran a marketing firm, and people in marketing never quite stopped working, even after 8 at night. He took a sip of his water. The refrigerator cycled on with a low hum. The second buzz came about 4 minutes later. He heard it because the house was so quiet. He set his glass down, very slowly, without making a sound. His eyes stayed on the window, but his mind shifted. Something about the rhythm of it. Not a quick notification ping, but the sustained buzz of an incoming call, and the fact that it was the second call in 4 minutes made his jaw tighten just slightly. Kendra didn't usually call people late. She was a texter. Even with her clients, she preferred a message to a call. She had explained once that calls created an expectation of immediate back and forth that she didn't like when she was in the middle of managing multiple things. So who was calling twice after 9 on a summer night? He was still standing at the counter when the third buzz came. And this time, what followed was not silence. What followed was the muffled pad of her feet moving toward the far end of the bedroom. Then the soft, deliberate click of the bathroom door. Not a casual click, not the click of someone going to wash her hands, but the click of a door being pulled shut with care, with intention. And then, through the wall and the hallway and the quiet house, he heard her voice. Low, barely above a whisper, but in a house where he knew every sound. The particular creak of the third step on the stairs, the rattle of the vent in the upstairs hallway when the air kicked on. It reached him with perfect clarity. I miss you too. 3 words, barely above a whisper. But 3 words have weight when they aren't meant for your husband. Everett stood completely still. His hand was still on the countertop. The water glass sat 2 feet away. He didn't move. He didn't make a sound. He processed the information the way he processed a balance sheet. Methodically, without emotion distorting the numbers. He didn't move toward the bedroom. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't do anything that would communicate to her that he had heard a single word. He filed it away instead. She came back into the kitchen 8 minutes later, phone tucked into her robe pocket, a tired and easy smile on her face. No guilt in it, no nervousness, just the comfortable look of someone who believed they had managed everything correctly. "Still up?" she said. "Just finishing up," Everett said. His voice was steady, warm even. He picked up his water glass and took a slow sip. "Come to bed soon," she said, and kissed him lightly on the cheek. Her lips were warm. She smelled like lavender, her usual lotion. She patted his arm gently as she passed, the way she had always done, a small habit that had been part of their evening routine for years. He watched her walk down the hallway. He watched the bedroom light go off, and he stood there in the dark kitchen, very still, for another 15 minutes. He told himself it could be nothing. He had told himself that before. The calls she said were work. The evening she came home 40 minutes later than expected and said traffic had been bad coming back from a client meeting in Brentwood. The weekend in May, when she had gone to what she described as a marketing conference in Chattanooga and had texted infrequently, and the texts had been short in a way that was not like her. He had told himself each one of those things could be nothing. And for a while he had chosen to believe that, not out of weakness, but out of fairness. He was not a man who assumed the worst without evidence. He did not operate on suspicion. He operated on proof. The problem was that proof required looking, and looking required accepting that what you found might change everything. He turned off the kitchen light and walked quietly upstairs. He stood in Miles's doorway for a minute. The boy was sprawled diagonally across the mattress the way he always was, one arm hanging off the side, mouth slightly open, dead to the world. Then he stood in Avery's doorway. She had her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin, her dark hair spread across the pillow. Her nightlight cast a soft orange glow across the room. He stood there and looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he came back downstairs and sat down at his desk in the small office off the living room. The computer monitor cast a pale blue glow across his face. He opened the bank application. He told himself he was just checking, just looking, being thorough. What he found took his breath away, not with panic, but with a cold, settling certainty. The kind that comes when something you feared turns out to be true, and the truth is even worse than what you feared. To understand how Everett Klein handled what he found, you have to understand where Everett Klein came from. He grew up in a double-wide trailer outside Murfreesboro, not the nice part of the county. The part where the roads didn't get paved as quickly and the school bus took 3 separate loop routes because the houses were spread so far apart. His father, Gerald Klein, was a well-meaning man who never met a business idea he couldn't talk himself into and never met a bank loan he could repay. Gerald had a gift for enthusiasm and a talent for convincing himself that this time would be different. He was not a bad man. He was just a man who confused wanting something to work with actually doing the work that made it work. By the time Everett was 16, his father had launched and lost 3 separate ventures. A car wash on the highway outside of town that had a leak problem Gerald never got fixed, a feed supply operation that underbid competitors without accounting for delivery costs, and a landscaping company that grew quickly and then collapsed because Gerald couldn't bring himself to fire the employees who were costing him more than they were earning. Gerald died at 52. Heart attack. Early morning, before sunrise, in the kitchen. He left behind a stack of debts, a used pickup truck with a cracked engine block, and a wife who had to start cleaning other people's houses at the age of 48 just to keep the lights on. Everett had watched his mother, Beverly, drive to other people's homes 6 days a week with a bucket of cleaning supplies and come home with swollen knees and a check that barely covered the bills. She never complained out loud about it. Complaining required energy, and she spent every unit of energy she had keeping the household running. But he could see it in the lines around her eyes and in the way she held herself in the evenings, still and careful, like someone who had been using their body hard and needed it to last. He watched all of it. He was 17 when his father died, and he made a decision then that went so deep into who he was that it became the foundation of everything that came after. He was not going to be caught unprepared. He was not going to let carelessness take from him what he had built. He was going to understand every number, every document, every agreement, every account. and he was never going to owe anyone an explanation for why he had made a choice to protect his own family. He started working at 16, part-time at a building supply company while he finished high school. After graduation, he skipped college, a decision that raised eyebrows among his teachers, but which he had already thought through completely. College cost money and took time, and what he needed was skills and income and a clear path to ownership. He found an HVAC company in Rutherford County run by a man named Dale Hutchins who believed in apprenticeships and was willing to train someone with no experience if that person showed up every day and paid attention. Everett showed up every single day. He paid attention to everything. By 24, he had his full licensure. By 27, he had saved enough to start his own operation. One truck, one helper, and a list of residential clients he had built through referrals. By 39, Klein Climate Solutions had 12 service vehicles, 17 employees, commercial contracts in 4 counties, and posted annual revenues of just over $6 million. He had never borrowed more than he could repay. He had never padded a bill. He had never promised something he couldn't deliver. His reputation in the HVAC business was as plain and solid as concrete. You called Klein Climate Solutions, someone showed up when they said they would fix what needed fixing and charge you what the job actually cost. Kendra came into his life when he was 32. She was 2 years younger, raised in Brentwood, the kind of upbringing where the family had a lake house and the kids went to private school and summer vacations involved more than a drive to visit relatives. She was smart and well-spoken and genuinely charming without it feeling performed. She ran a boutique marketing firm out of a shared office space in Cool Springs, 2 assistants, a growing client list, and a natural ability to make people feel understood and creatively represented. Everett had found her directness magnetic. She was the first person he had dated who matched his pace in conversation without trying to change his pace in life. She didn't push him to be different. She seemed to respect what he had built and how he had built it. He had funded her expansion because he believed in what she was doing. The $180,000 he put into the firm over the past 2 years hadn't felt like a loan. It had felt like a shared bet. He was backing his partner the way partners back each other. He had expected some transparency in return, not control but honesty, not monitoring but communication. He had expected that because he had been transparent himself. Every account, every investment, every significant decision. He had nothing hidden and had never felt the need to hide anything, because everything he had done since he was 17 years old had been built on a simple principle. Do the work, tell the truth, and let the results speak. He thought she had operated the same way. He sat in the pale, blue glow of his monitor and looked at the bank records on his screen, and he thought about all the evenings they had shared, all the weekend mornings, all the time she had kissed him in the kitchen with the casual warmth of a woman who seemed completely at home in the life they had built together. He understood now that a person can sit across from you for years and be managing you the entire time. They can look you in the eye and answer your questions and share your bed and smile at your children and be, inside all of that, an entirely different person building an entirely different future. That was the hardest part, not the money, not even the betrayal. The hardest part was adjusting to the reality that the partnership he had believed in had been, at some point he could not precisely name, replaced by something else. A performance, bought with the very money he had given freely because he trusted. He closed the laptop. He sat in the dark for a while. Then he opened it again and kept reading. He did not hire a private investigator. His first instinct had been to find someone professional who could build a case with photographs and testimonies. But he stopped himself before he made the call. Private investigators cost money, left paper trails of their own, and could occasionally be wrong. Their evidence was subject to challenge. More importantly, Everett had an instinct that the most damaging evidence was already sitting in the accounts, if he could find it and organize it correctly. He went through bank statements over 2 early mornings at the office, arriving before anyone else came in, spreading printed pages across the long conference table. He worked through them the same way he worked through a complex service estimate, methodically, line by line, not skipping anything. He had a yellow highlighter and a legal pad. He made notes. He drew arrows between dates and amounts. It took him 4 hours across 2 mornings to build the complete picture. 3 separate wire transfers had moved out of their joint investment account over the preceding 11 weeks. The first, $28,000, wired on a Tuesday afternoon in late April. The second, $31,000, wired on a Monday morning in mid-May. The third, $33,000, wired on a Friday in early June. All 3 went to the same receiving account. All 3 listed the same destination name in the memo field: Magnolia Horizon Ventures. He had never heard of Magnolia Horizon Ventures. He had never been told it existed. He had not agreed to or authorized any of these transfers. His signature was not on any of them. The transfers had been initiated through the online banking portal using Kendra's login credentials on days and times when Everett would have been at job sites or in the field. He went to the Tennessee Secretary of State's online database and searched the business name. The result came up immediately: Magnolia Horizon Ventures, a domestic limited liability company, registered 9 weeks ago. Registered agent, Trent Vallis. He stared at that name for a long time. He knew Trent Vallis. He had met him 18 months ago at a dinner hosted by Mutual Connection, a house in Green Hills, half a dozen couples, wine and appetizers on the back patio. Kendra had introduced Trent as a business consultant who was helping her firm think about a new client acquisition strategy. Everett had shaken the man's hand, made a brief conversation about Nashville's commercial real estate market, and thought nothing more of it. Trent had been the kind of man who was easy to underestimate. The right haircut, the right shoes, fluent in the vocabulary of business opportunity, but vague about specifics. The kind who talked about vision and synergy and leverage without ever quite explaining the mechanism. Everett had filed them away as harmless background noise. He had been wrong about that. He searched public property records next. He pulled up the Baldwin County, Alabama property search database and entered Magnolia Horizon Ventures as the owner name. The result appeared in under a minute. A signed purchase agreement on a waterfront condo unit in Gulf Shores, Alabama. 2 bedrooms. Second floor. Direct Gulf view. Listed purchase price, $440,000. Down payment recorded, $88,000. Scheduled closing date, September 3rd. He sat with his hands flat on the conference table and breathed slowly through his nose. She was not just having an affair. She was leaving. She had planned it. She had been quiet and patient and methodical about it, moving money in amounts large enough to matter, but spaced apart enough to avoid triggering automatic bank alerts. She had been building the financial infrastructure of a new life while sitting across from him at dinner and putting the kids to bed and kissing him in the kitchen like everything between them was what it appeared to be. He pulled up a fresh search window and looked up Trent Vallis more carefully. The LinkedIn profile listed him as a business development consultant based in Williamson County. He had a small marketing agency with 4 or 5 employees. More importantly, the profile listed him as married. His wife's name was Donna. Everett wrote that name down too. He spent the remainder of that morning building a complete, organized file. Printed bank statements with the transfers highlighted in red. The LLC registration document, time-stamped and certified. The property purchase agreement from the Baldwin County records. A chronological timeline he had drawn by hand on a legal pad, charting the LLC registration date against the first transfer 3 days later, then mapping each subsequent transfer against the dates Kendra had been supposedly working late or attending networking events. He printed backup copies of every document and locked one set in his office desk drawer. He uploaded digital copies to a cloud storage account he accessed through a private login Kendra had no knowledge of. He kept a third set in a sealed envelope in the truck. He organized everything as if he were building a legal exhibit, because he had known from the moment he first typed Magnolia Horizon Ventures into the search bar that this was not going to stay between the two of them. Then he went about the rest of the day as if none of it had happened. He drove to a commercial job site in Nolensville to review the progress on a large rooftop installation. He approved 2 purchase orders. He sat on a call with his operations manager about routing efficiency. He drove home in the evening and helped Miles practice grounders in the backyard while Avery drew on the porch steps. He sat at the dinner table and listened to his family talk. He laughed at something Miles said about his baseball coach. He helped Avery pick a book before bed. He said goodnight to Kendra the way he always did. Every single moment, he was present. Every single moment, the plan was taking shape in the back of his mind. He never moved without leverage. And right now, he had everything he needed. The 4th of July morning in Franklin was everything Tennessee in summer promised. Hot before 9 o'clock. A blue, cloudless sky that seemed to go on forever. The kind of day that smelled like cut grass and sunscreen and charcoal smoke drifting over from half the neighborhoods in the county. By 8:30, the heat was already pressing down, and the air had that thick, still quality that meant it was only going to get heavier as the afternoon came on. Everett loaded the car methodically. The large cooler, packed with drinks and ice the night before. The canvas folding chairs. The kids' swim bags, Miles's baseball gloves stuffed in at the last minute. Kendra's white canvas tote, which she had overpacked as she always did for family gatherings. He loaded all of it into the back of the SUV without rushing, without saying much, making sure everything was in before he went back inside. He had placed one additional item under his jacket in the back seat. A manila envelope, sealed, containing a printed deck of documents. He had prepared it 3 days ago. The drive to his mother's lake house took 25 minutes, out of town and down a Tulane County road shaded by old hardwoods. Beverly Klein had left the double wide a long time ago. Everett had purchased her current home 5 years back. A single-story brick house on a small lake in the rural part of the county. It had a wide back porch, a screened side room, and a wooden dock that stretched out over the shallows where the water was shallow and warm. It was one of the things Everett was most quietly proud of in his adult life. His mother had spent too many years in a house with thin walls and a leaky roof. She deserved somewhere solid. The lake house was already busy when they arrived. His sister Noelle was there with her husband Rick and their 2 teenage boys. His cousin Wyatt, a broad, loud man who sold farm equipment and laughed from deep in his chest, was already posted at the grill with a pair of tongs and a cold drink in his free hand. Kendra's parents had driven up from Brentwood, her father James in pressed khakis and a collared shirt, her mother Patricia in pale linen with gold jewelry, carrying a container of the macaroni salad she brought to every event, as if she were contributing something that could not be replicated. Kendra moved through the gathering the way she always did at social events, with a fluid, practiced ease that made her look at home in any room. She hugged Patricia. She complimented Noelle on her earrings. She squeezed Wyatt's arm and said something that made him laugh. She accepted a glass of iced tea from Beverly and told her how good the yard looked, and Beverly lit up a little the way she always did when Kendra paid her a compliment. Even now, after everything he knew, Everett could see the performance for what it was, and it was a good one. She had spent years perfecting it. The afternoon wore on the way summer holidays do. Food and noise and the comfortable back and forth of people who have known each other long enough to settle into easy rhythms. Miles and his cousins ran down to the dock and jumped in one after another. Avery found Beverly's cat and devoted the next hour to carrying it around. Wyatt and Rick argued about the upcoming football season with the pleasurable conviction of men who had nothing else at stake. Patricia and Beverly sat on the porch and talked about their respective gardens. Everett moved through it all at the same, even pace. He helped Wyatt at the grill. He carried food to the table when it was ready. He ate and talked and watched his kids play in the water. He answered when people spoke to him. He was completely present, and the entire time, the manila envelope was inside his jacket. Around 3:30, after the meal was done and the yard had settled into the slow, sun-heavy drift of a full holiday afternoon, Everett stood up from his lawn chair. He walked to the outdoor television mounted on the back porch wall. Beverly had put it in 3 summers ago for football games, and he connected his phone to it with the HDMI adapter he had brought. He did it quietly, without announcement, while Wyatt and Rick were still talking and the kids were still at the water. He pulled up the first file on his phone and confirmed it was ready. Then he walked back to the center of the group, picked up a fork, and tapped it against his glass. The sound traveled clearly in the warm air. Heads turned. Conversations paused. "I've got something to share," he said. His tone was measured, calm, like a man about to deliver quarterly numbers. Kendra looked up from where she was sitting between Patricia and Noelle. She had a half-smile on her face, the relaxed expression of someone who had heard him give toasts and announcements before and expected something pleasant. "Is this about expanding into Knoxville?" she said lightly. "Because I've been telling you for 2 years that market is wide open." "No," Everett said. Something in the flatness of that single word shifted the air between them. Her smile held, but just barely. Her eyes moved to his with a question in them that she was working to keep off her face. He turned toward the television and pressed play on his phone. Bank statements filled the screen. Their joint investment account, 3 months of history, the 3-wire transfers highlighted in red with the receiving account name visible in the transfer details field, Magnolia Horizon Ventures. The conversations around him went quiet the way a room goes quiet when a door slams. Not gradually. All at once. He advanced to the next slide. The Secretary of State filing for Magnolia Horizon Ventures. Registered agent, Trent Vallis. He heard Patricia set her glass down on the armrest with a careful, deliberate movement. Next, the Baldwin County, Alabama property records. The purchase agreement. The condo details. The closing date. Then the photographs. He had found them on Trent's professional Instagram account. 2 months ago, someone in Trent's orbit had clearly not thought about who might be watching. The photos showed Trent and Kendra at a waterfront property in Gulf Shores. Standing in front of a building, the Gulf visible and bright behind them. Their hands were intertwined. Kendra was laughing at something, turned toward him in a way that could not be mistaken for professional. Noelle made a small sound. Wyatt had gone completely still. Kendra stood up. Her chair scraped back across the wooden porch boards. Her voice came out sharp and fast. "This is completely insane," she said. "He is distorting everything. There are legitimate explanations for these financials. It's a business matter, not what he's making it look like." Everett let the screen sit on the photograph. "Is Magnolia Horizon Ventures yours?" he said. His voice was even, patient. The voice of someone asking a question they already know the answer to. She opened her mouth. Something passed behind her eyes. A calculation, fast and visible. The same kind of calculation he had seen in vendors who were trying to figure out how much he knew before deciding how much to admit. Her mouth closed. Then it opened again. That fraction of a second cost her everything in the room. James, who had been sitting with his hands folded on his knees, turned and looked at his daughter with an expression that was not anger. It was grief, quiet and immediate. The look of a man who thought he knew his child, who had loved and trusted her, and told himself he had raised her well, and who was discovering in real time on a holiday afternoon that there had been a version of her he had never been allowed to see. "Kendra," he said. Just her name. She pivoted immediately toward the group, and her voice dropped and her chin came up and the tears appeared right on schedule. Not hysterical tears, but the contained, dignified tears of a woman under pressure. And she said, "You don't understand what this marriage has been like. He monitors every account, every purchase, every time I need to buy something without getting his approval first. I had zero financial freedom. I was protecting myself." Her voice broke perfectly. "I was scared." The performance landed. He could see it in Noelle's expression, a flicker of uncertainty, the instinctive sympathy that a woman's distress tends to produce, especially when a man standing opposite her is calm and dry-eyed. Kendra understood her audience. She had always been good at that. But there was one thing she had not accounted for. Everett picked up the manila envelope from beneath his jacket on the chair. He opened it and walked around the tables, placing a stapled packet in front of James, then Patricia, then Noelle, then Wyatt, then Beverly. Each packet was identical. Each one contained the same documentation that was on the screen, including one additional piece of information he had saved for last. The final page of each packet was a certified statement from the joint custodial account he and Kendra had established 3 years ago in Miles's and Avery's names, specifically designated for educational expenses. On the date that the third wire transfer to Magnolia Horizon had been initiated, that account had held $94,000. After the transfer, it held $6,000. Patricia looked at the page. Her hand went to her mouth. James read it once. Then he read it again. Then he set the packet down on the table and looked at his daughter, and whatever he was going to say, he didn't say it because there were no words that quite fit the moment. Kendra's eyes went to the packet in her father's hands. She saw what was on the last page. For just an instant, the performance faltered. Something real came through, a flash of something she couldn't name, but that looked very much like a person realizing they have done something they cannot take back, and that the people they care about now know it. Then the performance returned. She straightened. She looked toward the group again. But the room had already turned. The tears weren't working the way they had been, because the last page in every packet had changed the context of every word she had said. "Everything is documented," Everett said. He was not speaking to her. He was speaking to the record. He was speaking to everyone present. Then he set down his folder, walked off the porch, and went to sit beside his mother near the water's edge. Beverly reached over and placed her hand over his without saying anything. She had grown up poor and practical, and she understood exactly what it meant when someone took from you what you had worked your whole life to build. From across the yard, he could still hear Kendra talking, still working the room, still looking for a story that would make this something other than what it was. He did not look back. He had prepared for this day for 3 weeks. He had done exactly what he came to do. The morning after the 4th, Everett was in his attorney's office at 8:15 with 2 organized folders and 12 documents in a specific order. David Marsh was a precise, methodical man who had been Everett's business attorney for 6 years. He wore dark suits every day without variation and spoke with the efficiency of someone who charged by the hour and believed in earning every dollar of it. He went through the folders without interrupting, reading each document fully before moving to the next. When he finished, he set the folders on his desk and looked at Everett over his reading glasses. "You want to move fast," he said. It was not a question. "Today," Everett said. By noon, 3 filings had been submitted to the Williamson County Circuit Court. The first was an emergency financial injunction, seeking an immediate freeze on all marital and joint assets, pending the resolution of divorce proceedings. The second was a formal divorce petition citing financial misconduct and the unauthorized transfer of marital funds. The third was a supporting affidavit containing the full documentary record Everett had compiled. Every bank statement, every wire transfer, the LLC filing, the property records, and a certified copy of the custodial account statement showing the movement of funds designated for the children's education. The emergency injunction was granted the same afternoon. Kendra's access to any joint account was frozen pending court review. She retained her own attorney by the following morning. The woman she hired was known in Williamson County legal circles as someone who specialized in contentious high-asset divorces and who had a particular skill for reframing unfavorable facts. Her counterfiling came within 48 hours. In its framing, it was thorough and aggressive. She alleged emotional abuse and financial control. A husband who had monitored her spending, limited her professional autonomy, and used money as a mechanism to keep her financially dependent and unable to make independent decisions. She described the transfers to Magnolia Horizon as an act of self-preservation, not misconduct. A woman quietly, carefully building an escape route because she did not feel safe asking for a divorce through normal channels. It was a well-constructed argument. Marsh had seen it before, and he told Everett plainly that it would be taken seriously. The abuse narrative in divorce proceedings is powerful precisely because it reframes the observable facts, the hidden transfers, the secret LLC, the planning, as evidence of fear rather than greed. It makes the documented party into the aggressor and the documenting party into the controller. In certain rooms, with certain presentations, it can work. Kendra presented it with skill. She arrived in the courtroom in understated, conservative clothing. She spoke softly and with apparent sincerity. She looked at the judge directly and did not look at Everett. When the emotional portions of her testimony came, the tears arrived at precisely the moments where they would be most credible. She described years of feeling watched, of having her professional decisions questioned, of needing to justify purchases to a husband who controlled the household finances and who responded to any sign of financial independence with what she called a pattern of withdrawal and cold hostility. There were moments in those sessions where Everett sat at his table and listened to a description of himself that he barely recognized, and he had to work to maintain the same flat, even expression he had been holding. Not because the description touched anything true in him, but because he understood that the portrait she was drawing was being drawn with a specific audience in mind, and that some portion of that audience, the judge, the court record, would weigh her words without knowing him. It required discipline to sit quietly while someone rewrote you. He had that discipline. He had been building it his whole life. Everett sat at his table and watched her and felt nothing that resembled what she was describing. He felt the focused, quiet attention of someone reviewing a presentation and noting where the numbers didn't match the narrative. Marsh presented the documentation in careful, sequential layers. First, the timeline of the 3 transfers, their dates, their amounts, and the online authorization records showing they had been initiated during hours when Everett was provably at job sites based on his GPS fleet tracking system. Second, the LLC filing and its relationship to the Gulf Shores property purchase. Third, the operating agreement for Magnolia Horizon Ventures, a 4-page document that had been notarized 3 days before the first wire transfer. It listed Kendra Klein and Trent Vallis as equal managing partners with equal equity stakes. She had signed it herself. There was no coercion in that document. There was no fear in it. There was a woman's signature in blue ink on the line marked managing partner, 3 days before the first $28,000 left their account. The operating agreement alone had weight, but it was the final piece that changed the atmosphere. Marsh placed on the record a certified copy of the custodial account statement, the account that both Everett and Kendra had established in their children's names, with the explicit and documented purpose of funding Miles's and Avery's future education. The account that, as of the date the 3rd transfer was made, had held $94,000. After the transfer, it held $6,000. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with the quiet, measured authority of someone who had presided over family court for 2 decades, looked up from the document in her hands. She did not look at Everett. She looked at Kendra. "Mrs. Klein," she said, "were you aware that the funds used for this down payment were designated for your children's education?" The courtroom was completely still. Kendra's attorney leaned toward her and said something quietly. Kendra listened with her eyes forward, her hands folded in her lap. Then she straightened, looked at the judge, and said the only word left available to her. Yes. One word, spoken quietly, without inflection. No qualifier attached to it. No follow-up that might soften it. No explanation offered. Just yes, direct and unadorned, landing in the silence of the courtroom like something dropped from height. It removed every flaw from the narrative her attorney had spent 2 days carefully constructing. Because a woman who is genuinely afraid of her husband does not drain her children's education fund to finance a private real estate investment with another man. A woman in real fear finds a way to leave with whatever she can access and gets herself to safety. She does not spend 3 months executing carefully timed wire transfers and registering a business entity and signing a condo purchase agreement and posing for photographs on a waterfront property with the man she has been seeing while her children are home with their father. What the documents described was not a woman escaping. It was a woman executing a deliberate plan she had built over months, using money that did not belong to her, and that was not hers to decide about. Money that had been designated by both parents, jointly and in writing, as belonging to their children's future. The judge held the document for a moment longer before setting it carefully back down on the bench. The quality of her attention in the room shifted. Everyone felt it. Kendra's attorney moved quickly to redirect, her voice picking up pace. But there are moments in a courtroom when the momentum has turned completely and additional words only make it more apparent. Everett sat straight in his chair throughout all of it. He did not display satisfaction. He did not allow himself any visible reaction at all. He was there to let the record speak, and the record was doing its work. The complication that broke everything fully open came not from Everett's side of the proceedings, but from a direction even he had not anticipated. Trent Vallis had his own problems. While the Klein divorce was working through the Williamson County Circuit Court system, Donna Vallis filed for divorce in the same county after discovering the Gulf Shores condo purchase. The discovery had happened the way these things often do, by accident. A credit card statement that arrived at the house on a day Trent was out of town. A charge from a real estate legal firm in Baldwin County, Alabama, that Donna did not recognize. A phone call to the firm, a polite and confused inquiry, and a paralegal on the other end who, not knowing the full situation, explained that the charge related to the closing cost review on a condo purchased by Magnolia Horizon Ventures. Donna had not heard of Magnolia Horizon Ventures. Within a week, she had learned enough. Within 2 weeks, she had an attorney. Her filing was precise, and her attorney was aggressive. And in addition to the divorce petition, she filed a civil fraud complaint against both Trent and Magnolia Horizon Ventures. The basis for the fraud claim was financial. Trent had used a small business credit line, secured against the marital home that he and Donna jointly owned, to fund his half of the equity stake in Magnolia Horizon. He had done this without her knowledge and without her consent, using an asset she had a legal interest in to guarantee a loan she had never agreed to take. A financial audit of Magnolia Horizon Ventures was initiated in connection with the fraud complaint. It was thorough and, as audits tend to be when the subjects have been imprecise in their record-keeping, revealing. What the auditors found changed the entire shape of the case. Over the preceding 8 months, while Kendra's boutique marketing firm had been billing clients normally, a portion of the contract payments had not been landing directly in the firm's operating accounts. Instead, they had been routed first through a business development company Trent controlled, described in the billing arrangements as providing strategic consulting services, and a percentage had been siphoned from those payments into the Magnolia Horizon account before the remainder reached Kendra's firm. It was a layered structure, not sophisticated enough to withstand professional scrutiny, but practiced enough to have continued undetected for the better part of a year. The total amount redirected this way, across 11 client contracts, was $67,000. When the auditors traced the authorization chain, they found Kendra's digital signature on 2 of the transfer approvals. She had known. She had been aware of the routing arrangement. She had signed documents authorizing specific movements that a managing partner of a legitimate business would have questioned immediately. She had not questioned them. She had signed them. There is a legal and factual distinction between a woman who makes poor romantic choices and a woman who knowingly participates in the fraudulent diversion of business funds for personal financial gain. The first is a personal failing. The second is conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Everett's attorney received a summary of the audit findings on a Tuesday morning. He called Everett before noon. "It's bigger than we originally built for," Marsh said. His voice was measured, but Everett had worked with him long enough to hear what lived underneath the measured tone. "How much bigger?" Everett said. "Significantly." A pause. "The fraud complaint findings change our filing. We need to amend the petition to reflect the full scope." Everett was quiet for a moment. He was standing in the parking lot of the job site in Brentwood, watching one of his technicians carry equipment from the service truck. The afternoon was bright and hot and completely ordinary. "File the amendment," he said. By the following week, the amended petition was in the court record. The counterfiling, Kendra's abuse narrative, was still part of the record too, but it was now sitting underneath a documented fraud case that had nothing to do with marital dynamics and everything to do with deliberate financial misconduct involving identifiable victims and traceable transactions. 2 divorces, 2 families, 1 fraudulent LLC, 1 beach condo that neither of the people who had planned for it would ever live in. The paperwork told the story now. It told it completely, and it told it in language that left very little room for interpretation. 6 months is a long time when your life is in suspension. Everett had learned this before, in the months after his father died, when everything had been uncertain and the future had felt like a room he was not yet allowed to enter. He had learned then that the only way to survive that kind of waiting was to stay in motion, to stay purposeful, to refuse to let the uncertainty of tomorrow make today feel useless. He applied the same principle now. Routine was the thing that held everything else together. He was up at 5:30 every morning without an alarm. He made his coffee, black, no sugar, the same way he had made it since he was 20, and reviewed his schedule and drove to work by 6:45, arriving before any of his employees and spending the first hour of every day doing the kind of focused, uninterrupted thinking that the rest of the day rarely allowed. He managed service calls and job bids and equipment purchases and the 100 small decisions that come with running a business with 17 people who depend on you. He reviewed a commercial bid in November that came in over budget and reworked the numbers himself. He resolved a scheduling dispute between two of his senior technicians by sitting them both down and telling them plainly that personal differences had no place on a job site, and that if either of them needed him to say it a second time, he would start looking for replacements. He approved a new software platform for dispatch routing that his operations manager had been advocating for. He kept the company moving forward because the company was real and the people in it were real, and neither of them could wait for his personal life to finish resolving itself. On Saturday mornings, he coached Miles's travel baseball team. He showed up every Saturday, whether he had been in court that week or not. On Wednesday afternoons, he drove Avery to her swimming lessons at the community center. He sat in the observation area with the other parents and watched her swim, and she always looked for him in the bleachers when she surfaced from a lap, and he was always exactly where he was supposed to be. He did not talk to the kids about what was happening with their mother beyond what was necessary and age-appropriate. He had thought carefully about what to say and had settled on the truth in its simplest form. He and their mom were going through some changes. They were going to work through it like grown-ups. Both of them loved Miles and Avery completely, and nothing about that was going to change. He said it the first time, and then when they asked again, he said it the same way, without drama, without any weight in it that they would need to carry. Miles had nodded the way older boys do when they understand more than they're letting on. Avery had asked if they were still going to go to Grandma Beverly's on weekends, and Everett had said of course, and she had accepted that and moved on. The final hearing was on a Thursday in January, cold and gray outside, the kind of January morning in Tennessee that feels like the year hasn't quite started yet. The courtroom was the same one they had used throughout: beige walls, fluorescent lighting, the faint smell of old carpet and recycled air. Everett had walked into it enough times that it felt neutral to him, just another professional space where work got done. He sat beside Marsh at the plaintiff's table. Kendra sat at the opposing table in a gray blazer, her hair pulled back, her posture composed. She had stopped performing in the later sessions. The tears and the careful emotional presentation had not produced the results she needed, and her attorney, being a practical woman, had shifted strategy toward a quieter approach. Minimize the misconduct, emphasize remorse, pursue a negotiated middle ground. There was no middle ground available. Not after the amended petition. Not after the audit. Marsh made the final presentation in plain, sequential order. He walked through the complete documented record, the timeline of transfers, the LLC, the operating agreement, the property records, the audit findings, the fraud complaint from the Vallis proceedings, and the signature authorizations with Kendra's name on them. He did not editorialize. He did not appeal to emotion. He assembled the facts in order and let the structure of them make the argument. The last thing he placed on the record was the custodial account statement. He read the relevant numbers aloud: the balance before, the transfer, the balance after. He noted that the account had been established by both parties specifically for the education of their two minor children, who were at the time of the hearing 12 and 8 years old, and who had no say in how that account was used or emptied. Then he sat down. Kendra's attorney made her closing remarks. She was measured and direct, and she did the best she could with what she had. She described her client as someone who had made serious errors in judgment under significant personal stress, who understood the severity of those choices, and who was prepared to be accountable while asking the court for proportional consequences rather than maximum penalty. The judge had heard both sides for months. She looked at her notes for a moment. Then she spoke. Custody of Miles and Avery. Primary residential custody awarded to Everett, citing a documented pattern of financial decision-making that demonstrated a failure to prioritize the children's long-term interests over personal ones. Kendra was granted regular scheduled visitation. The $92,000 transferred to Magnolia Horizon from the joint investment account was ordered to be returned to Everett in full, with interest calculated from the date of the last transfer. Kendra was assigned full responsibility for the legal costs associated with discovery and documentation of the intentional asset concealment. Spousal support denied. The judge's closing statement was not long, but it was precise. She looked at Kendra steadily and said, in a voice with no heat in it, but with the unmistakable weight of someone who had made her assessment and was putting it on the permanent record, marriage does not grant permission to dismantle your family's financial future. The misuse of funds held in trust for the benefit of minor children is treated by this court with particular seriousness. The documentation in this case does not support a finding of duress or coercion sufficient to explain or justify the actions taken. The court finds that the respondent made deliberate, calculated choices across an extended period of time. She gathered her papers and left the bench. Kendra sat very still. Her attorney put a hand on her arm and said something quiet, something that might have been reassurance or might have been logistics, and Kendra nodded slowly once. She was staring at the table, not crying, not arguing, just very still, the way a person is still when the version of events they have been presenting to the world has finally, completely run out of room. Everett stood, buttoned his jacket, and shook Marcia's hand. He thanked him briefly and genuinely. He did not look across the aisle. He picked up his folder and walked out of the courtroom. The January air outside the courthouse was sharp and cold, and he stood on the top step for a moment and breathed it in. The sky was pale and low. A crow crossed the parking lot slowly, wings wide and unhurried. A few other people from adjacent proceedings passed behind him through the heavy courthouse doors, carrying their own files and their own unfinished business, the quiet, ordinary traffic of a working courthouse on a cold weekday morning. He did not feel what he had expected to feel. Not triumph, not the particular relief of a man released from pressure. What he felt was quieter than any of those things, a kind of deep, settled completion. The feeling of a man who started something correctly, carried it without flinching, and finished it the way he had started it. He thought briefly about his father, about Gerald Klein, who had always had a plan that depended on things going right rather than on documentation that made things right regardless of what anyone did next. Everett had built everything in his life on the opposite principle. The principle that the truth, when you record it carefully and present it clearly, takes care of itself. You don't need to win arguments. You need to build records. He had built one. The record had spoken. His children were protected. That was the only thing that had ever actually mattered. He got in his truck and drove to pick up the kids from school. Trent Vallis's life came apart faster and more publicly than Kendra's, and with considerably less composure. The civil fraud complaint Donna's attorney had filed moved through the courts with the efficient momentum that clean documentation tends to produce. Trent's own record-keeping, which the auditor had described in a court filing as notably detailed, had provided investigators with something close to a roadmap of every problematic transaction. He had kept internal notes, communications, and transfer confirmations in a business management app, apparently under the assumption that no one else would ever see them. That assumption had not survived the discovery process. By the late fall, his small marketing agency in Williamson County had fewer clients than it had staff, and the staff had already been let go. The initial public filing of the fraud complaint, which became part of the searchable public record in September, had been covered in a 2-paragraph item in the county business section, and in a county this size, 2 paragraphs in the right publication is enough. The clients who had been with him for years quietly moved their contracts to other firms without requiring an explanation. The phone calls to new prospects stopped being returned. His business was finished before the court proceedings concluded. The final settlement in his divorce gave the marital home to Donna, along with the majority of their liquid assets. The business credit line that had been secured against the house and used to fund his equity stake in Magnolia Horizon was classified by the court as a debt incurred through intentional misconduct, unrelated to the marital partnership, and it remained his debt alone to repay. He moved into a rented room in a house share in an eastern Nashville suburb. He was 41 years old and starting over from a position that contained very little of the previous structure of his life. The Gulf Shores condo deal collapsed in early September, 3 weeks before the scheduled closing date. The financial injunctions had frozen the Magnolia Horizon accounts, and when the closing funds could not be confirmed, the purchase agreement lapsed. The seller relisted the property. It sold within 6 weeks to another buyer for slightly more than the original purchase price. Magnolia Horizon Ventures was formally dissolved in November. The entity that had been built to carry 2 people out of their existing lives had existed for 9 months and accomplished nothing except creating documented evidence of deliberate financial misconduct. For Kendra, the consequences arrived more slowly, but just as completely. She moved out of the Franklin house in late August, once the legal proceedings had progressed far enough for the asset division to be partially settled. What she was able to take with her, after the reimbursements, after the legal costs, after the court-ordered repayments, was substantially less than she had imagined when she had been planning her exit. She signed a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex outside Nashville, 20 minutes from Franklin in the direction away from Brentwood, in a neighborhood that had no particular connection to her previous life. The boutique marketing firm continued to operate, but with difficulty. 3 of its largest clients had ended their contracts in the fall, after the Magnolia Horizon audit findings became part of the public record and the connection to the fraud complaint was reported in the same county business section. Some of the clients had personal relationships with people in Kendra's social circle from the Franklin years. Some of them had simply done a public records search before renewing contracts. Whatever their individual reasons, the effect was the same. She had structured her exit around a plan that required not being discovered. The plan had been discovered. Everything downstream of that discovery, the condo, the business, the financial position, the social standing, had collapsed in sequence like a structure that looked solid until you remove the one element it was entirely built on. The life she had planned never materialized. Court-mandated repayment consumed the majority of what came in. She rebuilt slowly, client by client, in smaller engagements than she had managed before. She showed up for her weekend visits with the kids, and in those hours she was genuinely present with them in a way that the previous year had not allowed, and this was perhaps the only thing that had improved. But the brick colonial in Franklin was someone else's house. The future she had spent a year constructing was gone, and the man she had left was raising their children in the home they had all shared, steady and present, and unchanged by everything she had done to move him. Miles had developed a habit of scanning the bleachers after every notable play. He was 12 now, tall for his age, moving with the loose, limbed confidence of a boy who had found the thing he was genuinely good at. When he stole second on a poor throw in the 3rd inning of the spring travel game, he stood up from his slide, brushed the red dirt off his pants, and immediately looked to the third base line. Everett was right there. He always was. The evenings had gotten longer as spring came on, and the field lights hadn't been turned on yet. The grass smelled fresh, and the concession stand behind the bleachers was doing a steady business in hot dogs and iced drinks, and the particular combination of popcorn and cooking oil that is specific to youth sports complexes the world over. The sound of the game, the metal crack of a bat, the chatter of infielders, the occasional burst of parental applause, moved through the warm air the way sounds move on spring evenings, clear and unhurried. Everett was standing near the chain-link fence along the third base line, his arms loose at his sides, watching Miles take his lead-off second. He had his truck keys in his jacket pocket and a folding chair he had not sat in for 3 innings because he preferred to stand when Miles was on base. He heard footsteps on the gravel path behind him and registered them without turning. He knew from their pace and rhythm who they belonged to before she stopped beside him. Kendra stood 2 feet to his left, hands in the front pocket of her jacket, looking toward the field. She had lost some of the careful, curated quality she had always carried in social settings. The hair was simpler. The posture was less constructed. She looked like someone who had stopped performing and was figuring out what was left after the performance. They stood without speaking for a moment, both of them watching Miles shuffle his lead-off second as the pitcher went into his windup. Then she said, quietly, without looking at him, "I never meant for it to go that far." Everett listened to the words. He understood what they contained and what they were missing. It was not a confession. It was not a request for forgiveness. It was the statement of someone reviewing an outcome they had not intended, the way you might say you never meant for a negotiation to fall apart. meaning you had wanted the result, but not the damage trail that came with it. You didn't plan for it to fail, he said. She was quiet for a moment. The pitcher delivered. The batter fouled it off to the right. The catcher jogged back to his spot. You could have handled it privately, she said. Her voice was steady, but there was something thin underneath it. The 4th of July, in front of everyone. You didn't have to do it that way. He thought about her question. He had thought about it many times before in the months since, and each time he had arrived at the same place. He could have called her into the kitchen one evening and laid the documents on the table and had the conversation quietly, just the two of them. He had thought about doing it that way. He had turned it over carefully and decided against it. You didn't give me a private problem, he said. His voice carried no heat, just the settled weight of someone who had worked through this completely. You emptied our children's college fund. That stopped being something between just the two of us the moment you did it. Miles and Avery didn't have a say in that. Both families needed to understand what had happened. I didn't create a public problem. You did. She was quiet. On the field, Miles broke for third on a pass ball and slid in safe. The third base coach slapped his hands together, and the parents in the bleachers made noise. Everett watched his son stand up, his uniform dirty from the slide, grinning the wide, uninhibited grin of a boy who is exactly where he should be. I know, Kendra said, quiet and flat and clean, with nothing else underneath it. No negotiation in it. No follow-up. He looked at her, not with anger, not with the residue of hurt that he could have carried if he had chosen to. He had done a lot of work over the past 8 months, not therapy, though he had considered it, but the harder private work of sitting with difficult things until they lost their grip on you. Kendra had been someone he had chosen and trusted and built a life with, and the version of her that had done what she had done was not the only version that had existed. Both things were true, and he had learned to hold both without letting either one be the final word. I hope you find something stable, he said, and he meant it, not as a performance of graciousness, but as the genuine, uncomplicated wish of a man who had no further use for resentment and no interest in anyone's ongoing suffering, including hers. She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once, turned, and walked back across the gravel toward the opposite side of the bleachers, toward the section where she had been sitting, where other parents were watching the same game with the same folding chairs and the same bottled water and the same focused, ordinary attention that sports events produce in people who care about the kids on the field. He watched her go for a moment, just long enough to know she had made it back to the other side of the bleachers without looking back. Then he turned back to the field. He had never once asked her to come back, not in the immediate aftermath of the revelation at the lake house, not in the slow, grinding weeks of discovery depositions, not in the difficult stretch between the filing and the ruling when everything was in suspension and the house was very quiet after the kids went to bed. He had not gone to her with any version of forgiveness or negotiation or the offer of a clean start built on different terms. Not because he was punishing her by withholding it, but because there was nothing honest to go back to. What they had built together had not been strong enough to survive what she had done to it. And he had known that clearly from the first morning he spread the bank statements across the conference room table. You cannot rebuild a foundation on deliberate betrayal. There is nothing there to build on. He had moved forward instead. That was the only direction that had ever made sense to him. The next batter stepped to the plate. The pitcher wound up. The infield chatter picked back up. The automatic, rhythmic encouragement of kids playing a game they love in the last good light of a spring evening. Miles stood on third base with his hand on his knee, watching the pitch, reading the situation the way a smart base runner does. He looked up once toward the fence. Everett raised his hand. His son grinned and looked back toward home plate. Steady, unshaken, still exactly the man his mother had raised him to become, standing in the warm spring air with his keys in his pocket and his son 30 feet away and everything worth protecting still intact. He had not destroyed her. He had not needed to. He had simply stopped letting anyone take what his children were owed, and then he had let the truth do the rest. And the truth had been thorough.